characteristics are, it gets it from God, like our children get our characteristics and sometimes our physical appearance from us. So in summary, chapters 1 to 9 is God, and chapters 10 to 31 is the daily or the manifestation of God in daily life. So we've really got a great little summary of God manifestation in this book of Proverbs. Now, I said that chapters 10 to 31, it's a bit hard to sort of break them up because it's different subjects one after the other, but chapters 1 to 9 does have a certain order to it. I'm not going to read through that. It's just, that's the order. I mentioned last week about a writer called Bruce Waltke who wrote 2 very thick volumes on Proverbs, and that was the structure that he put together, which I think was pretty good. And what he suggested was that chapters 1 to 9 has 10 lectures from a father to a son. And as well as that, there's the little introduction, there's a little interlude about wisdom calling to us, and then a little section in the middle, and then those 2 sections at the end. But that's sort of how he suggests, and I reckon that's not a bad way of breaking it up. But the interesting thing about that is, when you look at that, all those sections, that quite a lot of that content is couched as if it's a woman, either a wise woman or an immoral woman. So wisdom and foolishness are presented in this chapters 1 to 9 to a very large degree as 2 different women. In fact, for the statistically minded, there is a pie chart of the proportions of this chapter. So just over 50% of chapters 1 to 9 is about 2 women, imaginary women. Wisdom as a wise woman and foolishness as a very dangerous woman. So it describes how one of those women can overcome the other woman. Now, when we pick up this book, and so we read chapters 1 to 9, we ask ourselves, well, why would it do that? Why would it present these 2 things as women? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons, maybe. One is that this is poetry. This is Hebrew poetry. And so likening 2 things which are, inanimate things, they're just qualities, wisdom and foolishness, likening those 2 things to people is a very creative and clever way of putting across that content. It's graphic, it's very memorable, and it's a really great way of conveying that in a really interesting way. But why does it choose women? It could choose anything, couldn't it? Why does it choose women? Well, I think one of the reasons for that, I think the reason for that is that when you look through chapters 1 to 9, it repeatedly has this phrase, my son. And chapters 1 to 9 is really couched in a scene of a father, probably a king, speaking to his son. So 12 times in chapters 1 to 9, you get this phrase of my son. 9 of the 10 lectures, if we break it up by those 10 lectures, 9 of them start with my son. So it's written in the context of a king in a royal court speaking to his son. And that son, of course, is one day he's going to be king. So he's got the responsibility of looking after that kingdom. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that this is a book for men and not for women, because that's obviously not the case. In fact, it talks about a faithful mother in this section. So she's obviously a woman who has acquired the sort of wisdom that you would get from Proverbs. But it's the setting is a father giving advice for life to his son. So if you think of that and look at that picture, obviously it's just a picture. We don't know what that king is saying. But if he was giving advice to his son, that father knows that one of the central parts of that son's life is going to be his relationship to women, or ideally one woman. It's going to loom very large in that son's life and in his mind and in his plans. And whatever decisions he makes in that area of his life, that is going to be one of his most important and consequential decisions. And depending on what he decides, it could be a source of great help and happiness in his life, or it could bring problems, and it could bring sadness in his life. It could be very beneficial to him, or it could turn out to be very harmful. It could help bring him closer to God, or it could drive him away from God. But whatever decision he makes, either way, It's going to be a very powerful influence in his life. So the father explains to the son that a godly woman is a wonderful thing, he would say to his son, and a very attractive thing you should look for in your life. But that father also alerts his son to the realistic fact that the opposite type of woman also has her powerful attractions as well. And the father knows that, and he's going to advise his son on that. So his advice is to make the right choice because the stakes are enormous. Now, all of that's true, isn't it? But the point of this section in Proverbs 1 to 9 is that all of that is also true of the decision to pursue either wisdom or foolishness. So this section, even though more than half of it is about this woman and her, how she interacts with a man or men, it's not primarily talking about male and female relationships, although it can probably help with that. It's using a very important part of life, which we can all relate to, important to all of us, to make a point about godly wisdom. So it becomes one very strong woman, whose name we could call foolishness, with the power to destroy that son's life if he lets her, pitted against an even stronger woman, who we could call wisdom. And she could protect that son against the dangers of that other woman called foolishness. And she could bring great blessings in his life. So what we've got here is a very clever and dramatic two-character play. Two people. But they're never together on the stage. If we imagine ourselves looking at this as a show in a theatre, they're never together on stage because they are opposites. They don't mix. And there are only two of them. There's not a range of different women or characters to choose from. It's not like the king says, well, you can choose wisdom, which you should, avoid foolishness. But there's sort of this other third woman in the middle, and she's sort of a mix of both, and that's not a bad choice either. No, it's one or the other. They are two extremes, and that's what that book is presenting to us. There's not a third choice. There's one or the other, and we either choose God or we don't. And this son, who must decide between these two imaginary women, represents every person, male and female. It represents everyone in this room. We've also got to make that choice, either between foolishness or wisdom. And not only that, but the other great thing about it is, I think, that by likening wisdom to a woman, it's a very poetic way of expressing that wisdom isn't just knowledge. It's not just something to know or agree with, or even just something to do. It's actually a thing that we could have a relationship with. It's a thing to fall in love with. It's a thing to treasure above anything else in our life. Just turn with me to Proverbs chapter 4, please. Just look at these verses. So it's quite beautiful the way it expresses this. In Proverbs 4 and verse 5, we read there, get wisdom, get understanding, forget it not, neither decline from the words of my mouth. Forsake her not, and she shall preserve thee. Love her, and she shall keep thee. Verse 8, exalt her, and she shall promote thee. She shall bring thee to honour when thou dost embrace her. So this is just talking about wisdom, and yet it says to love her, exalt, or as the ESV renders it, prize her, embrace her, give her a great big hug, and hold her. So they're not words we would normally use about a quality like wisdom. They're words we would use about people. So if I overheard Brother Peter talking about Sister Grace, or if I heard Brother Peter using words like embrace, hold, love, I would assume he's talking about a person, not about some knowledge. And I would hope and I think he's talking about Sister Grace. That's what I would think. If If it turns out he wasn't speaking about grace, then I'm not sure what I'd do. I'd have to think about I'd have to do something else. But that's what the way we speak about people, isn't it? They're people words. And this is talking about wisdom. So it's a brilliant and memorable way of just lifting what could otherwise be a fairly dry, sort of academic, two-dimensional thing into something very real and something meaningful, something relatable, and something very memorable, which is what Proverbs are designed to be. It could have just said, prize it, value it, but it's turned it into a love story between a person and the quality of wisdom. But lurking in the shadows is the villain. There's always a villain in the story. And we're aware of that villain. And we're going to see this contest between these two people. So it's very, very dramatic the way it is expressed, all done by a Heavenly Father for our benefit, to help us, to help make this book accessible to us and make it memorable to us. Now, at the end of the chapter we read, in chapter 9, as you can see down the bottom there, it's got this epilogue. And so, as I said before, chapters 1 to 9 are setting us up to read the rest of the book. And chapter 9 is the final dramatic setup. And as we read, and as we're probably quite familiar anyway, it's a picture of two very different women who issue two invitations to two very different events. And one of those women, Wisdom, prepares very busily and very carefully and very thoughtfully. Whereas this is in verses 1 to 3. We'll just read that again. Wisdom hath builded her house. She hath hewn out her 7 pillars. She hath killed her beasts. She hath mingled her wine. She hath furnished her table. She hath sent forth her maidens. She crieth upon the highest places of the city. So this is a very busy, thoughtful, careful woman. And that's in stark contrast to the other woman in verse 13. A foolish woman is clamorous. She is simple and knoweth nothing. She sits at the door of her house on a seat in the high places of the city to call passengers who go right on their ways. So there's not a lot of effort from this particular woman. There's not much effort she's putting in, and there's not much effort that she requires to attract people to what she's offering. That's a pretty easy sell. And the invitation list is the same. In verse 4, the wise woman, whoso is simple, let him turn in hither. As for him that wanteth understanding, she saith to him, etc. Verse 16, same invitation list to the other woman. Whoso is simple, let him turn in hither. As for him that wanteth understanding, she saith to him. So the invitation list is the same, but they are being invited for two very different reasons. And we could perhaps describe or picture the second of those events that people are being invited to as something like that. It's a very dark, and this is from, you read about that from verses 13 to the end. It's a pretty dark, seedy event. And the draw card is pretty much anything goes. That's the draw card, which sounds like fun. And in verse 17, it is fun. It says it's sweet and it's pleasant. But verse 17 also adds the words, it's stolen and it's secret. And I guess that's what the attraction is. Well, that's what it seemed to be like. But as we read, when you enter that event, we find to our horror that everyone in the room is dead. In verse 18, it's a room full of corpses. And it reads like the script of a horror movie, doesn't it? If that was to be depicted on the screen in front of us, it'd be a terrible scene. And the contrast, of course, is that first event from verses 1 to 12, this very carefully prepared meal. If we read in verse 5, come eat of my bread and drink of the wine which I have mingled. It's like a beautiful banquet. So this imaginary woman called Wisdom, she has prepared her house, verse 1, she has builded her house, and then in the house is, at the end of verse 2, a well-furnished table. So the way I sort of imagine it, I don't know if this is the way it was sort of supposed to be presented, but it seems to me, the way I imagine it anyway, is that the house that she built in verse 1 is Proverbs 1 to 9. the conditions in which to best enjoy the banquet. If we were to have a banquet, we want to have a house to have it in. Verses chapters 1 to 9 is the house, the conditions in which to best enjoy the banquet. And the banquet itself is the rest of the book. Chapters 10 to 31 is the banquet. Page after page of beautifully prepared courses. Every one of them different, variety, full of interest, something to satisfy every need and taste. So when we proceed through those first 9 chapters and we read chapter 9 and then we embark upon the rest of the book, it's like we have the privilege of sitting on one of those chairs at that beautiful banquet table and partaking of what this woman called Wisdom has laid out for us on her magnificent table. And what a feast that is, and what a treasure that makes the book of Proverbs. Now, next thing we wanted to talk about was, that's it for chapter 1 to 9, so we're going very briefly, but just this, another couple of themes to finish with. And one is the theme of making decisions. Now, I don't like making decisions. I'm not a very good decision maker. And I admire people who seem to have that ability. They make decisions and it's, usually the right decision, but they've got the ability just to cut through and make the call. And I just dither around and wait for that call to be made. So I admire people who can do that. But of course, making decisions is something that is part of all of our lives. So, we get an opportunity for a new job, or someone in the ecclesia starts to head down the wrong path. And what are we going to do about that? Maybe the ecclesia starts to head in the wrong direction. We think someone hurts you or hurts someone that you love. What do? Or maybe you hurt someone, and now how are you going to respond to what you've done? And suddenly, as we all know, life goes from being very simple when we're children, very limited choice. All the choices are made for us. We probably rather it not be like that when we're kids, but it's all made. The choices are all made for us. And then suddenly we get to that stage in life where we've got to make the decisions, and they're ours to make, and we're going to wear the consequences of those decisions. And one of the great gifts that I think this book can give us is help in making those decisions. But it depends on how we actually approach the book. So on the one hand, we could pick up a book like Proverbs and we could say, well, boy, this is tough. There's a lot of things in here that are really hard. This is a very challenging book. And that's true, because decisions, as we know, are easier if we just do what comes naturally to us. The results may not be the best for us, but the actual decision-making process was very easy. What would I like to do? That's what I'll do. Very, very simple. What feels right? Then that's what I'll do. Now, the challenge comes when we decide to be different to what comes naturally. And this book, in that sense, is a very challenging book, because it challenges us to do all sorts of things that we don't find, or doesn't come naturally to us. It asks us to think and react like God. And we're not like God, not naturally so. So if we view it from that perspective, the book of Proverbs can seem very daunting. We've got 600 odd Proverbs here. Pretty much all of them we find hard to do. We wouldn't naturally do them. So that's a very daunting thing. It's really hard to do. And they're things we'd rather not do often. But on the other hand, Proverbs can make our life very, very simple. It can make life very straightforward. It can put an end to the difficulty of making decisions about things, about tossing and turning in the middle of the night like she is, about what to do or what not to do. And we've all experienced that, haven't we? We agonise over the consequences of a decision we've made or a decision we've got to make. And we stress over all of that, and we get stressed over what someone else has done in that circumstance and what other people might think of whatever decision we make, worrying about what other people might think, what others are telling me to do. And we toss and turn over that. And the book of Proverbs can just cut right through all of that with a very, very simple message. And the simple message, if you come back with me please, to Proverbs chapter 3. The simple message of the book of Proverbs is this. In Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 5, it simply says, trust in Yahweh with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. The word trust in the Hebrew means to be confident, to be sure, to be bold or secure. It's a great feeling, isn't it? When you know you've made the right decision and you never have to second guess it and worry about it again. That's one of the best feelings we could ever have in life, isn't it? And Proverbs can give us that feeling right now. And the reason it can give us that feeling is because of what that verse says. Lean not unto thine own understanding. The reason she can't get to sleep is because she's leaning, she's leaning on her own understanding. That's the reason we get in a situation like that. She's leaning on something which is very unstable, which might fall over because it's her own understanding or our understanding. That's the sort of thing that keeps us awake at night. This whole thing could fall over. I might have made the totally wrong decision. But instead, Proverbs invites us to trust and lean on something very stable, very, very reliable. And if we turn back a page, we see what that is. Proverbs chapter 2 and verse 6. It says, for Yahweh giveth wisdom, out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. So there's we were saying the other night, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, all together in that verse, packaged together. Where do they come from? The answer is they come from God. So when we trust in a book like this, we're not just trusting in the Proverbs. We're actually trusting in the source of those Proverbs. And that source is God. So it's like as if we've been able to respectfully go to God himself and say, my dear Heavenly Father, what would you do in this situation, in this specific situation? And God himself answers us and says, I would do this. That's what I would do. Now, if we could actually do that, and then we had that conversation with God, and then we went and did what God said that he would do, are you going to have a sleepless night the next night wondering whether you made the right decision? Of course not. We're going to, even if the advice went against our instincts, even if it was different to what everyone else had told us to do or what others have done in the same circumstance, even if it seems unfair, even if it seems I'm getting ripped off and I'm not, I should stand up for myself more, all of that doesn't matter because we know we've followed God's advice, and that's all we need to think about. And what's going to happen at the end of that, if we go back to chapter 3, is verse 24. When thou liest down, thou shalt not be afraid, yea, thou shalt lie down, and thy sleep shall be sweet. So we can just put that poor lady to sleep. And there she is. She doesn't worry about what she's done now because she's followed God's advice. And the great thing about a verse like chapter 3 and verse 5, where it said, trust in Yahweh with all thine heart, is that if you just read that as it is, you'd think, well, that's a nice sentiment. But what does it actually mean? Trust in Yahweh with all your heart. That I can't really translate that into just everyday nuts and bolts life that we live. It's a bit vague. It's a little bit impractical. What does it actually mean? But in the book of Proverbs, of course, it's followed by hundreds and hundreds of very specific examples of what that looks like when you get up in the morning, between when you get up in the morning and when you go to bed at night. Exactly what that looks like. Now, of course, not every decision in life has a specific proverb telling us what to do. Probably, the vast majority of decisions probably don't. But for most of our decisions, what we will find in this book are the godly principles that we should bring to those decisions. That's really the key to making good decisions, isn't it? It's maybe not focusing so much on the specifics of this particular circumstance, but sort of standing back and thinking, well, what godly principle would I bring to that? And this book of Proverbs will surely have something that we can bring to that. So it'll tell us what that is, and the principle is fairly obvious. And when we put that over the difficult decision that we're grappling with, suddenly it can become very, very simple. And we can say, of course, that's what we've got to do. And that's it. Let's do it. And we're done. Sometimes we think, oh, there's grey area, could do this and that, and that's a little bit difficult, could do either. And maybe that is the case at times. But I think very often, if we just sort of have the courage to say, what would God say about this? Or if Jesus was here, what would he say? And often we don't do that because we know what the answer is going to be, but we don't want that answer. But if we actually ask that, suddenly it becomes very clear, and we can say, look, it might not be what I would have done. I don't know what the end's going to be, but that clearly would be the right thing to do. And so it can help us with our decision making in life. Now, of course, none of that makes the decision easy to do because we're not doing what comes naturally. But at least what it does is just simplifies the process of weighing up our options. And it gives us the absolute confidence that we've made the right decision because we didn't make the decision. That's the problem, isn't it? When we make a decision, I'm leaning on my own understanding. But if I let God make the decision, then it's God's decision. And regardless of the outcome, we never, ever, ever have to look back and replay it in our minds over and over and wondering whether we did the right thing back then or whether we should have done something different. We just simply trust in Yahweh. Now, I'm sure there are examples in your life where you've done that. I can think of examples, not many, but I can think of examples when I've done that, and you would know as I do that is a wonderful feeling when you do that. When you are grappling with some problem and then you just suddenly cut through it all and say, I'm kidding myself. I actually know what God would have me do here. I just don't want to do that. And then we do it. It is just the biggest load off our shoulders, isn't it? It's an amazing feeling when we do that. But if you're anything like me, we just don't do it very often. And why? It's crazy. Why don't we do it more often? Our Heavenly Father must look at us and think, why don't you do it more often? It's exactly what you need. It'll make your life so much better, so much easier and stress-free, and you'll feel so much closer to God. Like we said, this book is not just about make life stress-free. It's going to give us a closeness to God and a confidence in the way hopefully in the way we're living our life. Anyway, I think that's one of the blessings of this book that when it comes to making decisions. Now, the third thing I want to look at, final thing, was just this subject of truth. Because we use the phrase the truth, don't we? We say we are in the truth. And we know that what we mean by that is that we believe that we understand the truth. We understand the true message of the Bible spoken by God. But of course, if that's the case, and we believe it is, then the very least we should be is honest, truthful people. There are lots of ways for us to reflect God in our life, isn't there? All sorts of things we can do. But surely, at first base, the most basic thing is honesty and truth. Because whatever else we do, if we didn't have that, but we did a whole lot of other things in ecclesial life, it would seem that all of that would be tainted, wouldn't it? It'd be tainted by that flaw that we're not truthful people. I mean, we're like that in our relationships, aren't we? If we had in a close relationship with someone and they're a lovely person, we've got a lovely relationship, but the one flaw is they keep telling lies to us, and we know that they do that. That's going to taint that relationship, isn't it? It's what you couldn't think the relationship could even continue in any real way if there's not honesty. So the question is, how much do we actually value? How much value do we really place on being honest? How important is it to you, and how important is it to me? Now, there's that painful-looking chart again, and in honesty, I've got in blue up in the top left, and you can see there's quite a few proverbs on honesty. I counted 28 actually, from chapters 10 to 31, and we're going to look at just 5 of those proverbs about honesty. Now, if you think about, there's a picture of a massive rock. Now, we can rely on that rock, not moving, can't we? Whatever, I don't even know where that is in the world, but wherever it is, I'm pretty sure it's there, right there, right now. It's looking a little bit worn, but it doesn't move. It's never going to move. Now, in Deuteronomy 32, we read that God is the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment. He is a God of truth, and without iniquity, just and right is he. He is a rock of truth. Now, we live in a world, as we all know, where morality and truth is very, very flexible. It changes. We can feel it changing beneath our feet. And it's like the water around that rock. It will move, the tides will come and go, but we want to be on that rock. We want to be on solid, reliable, honest, truthful ground. And that's what God is like. And that's why he hates what is false. Now, if you just turn with me to Proverbs 6, I know we're all be very familiar with this little section where God lists off, he gives us the privilege of the insight of seeing the things that he hates. And we read in Proverbs chapter 6, from verses 16 to 19, these 6 things doth Yahweh hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him. 7 things that he hates: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, and heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among the brethren. So there's things, those things are an abomination to God. Now that word abomination in the Hebrew, it means disgusting or abhorrent or detestable. And 2 of that list of 7 disgusting things to God are in verse 17, a lying tongue, and in verse 19, a false witness that speaketh lies. Now, Hebrew scholars seem to have a bit of difficulty, and so do I, distinguishing the difference between what those 2 things are. Lying in verse 17 is the same word as the word false in verse 19. It means it's just an untruth or a sham. Now, verse 19 adds a false witness that speaketh lies, which sort of suggests when you read it that it's sort of like a very deliberate, calculated lie. This person is a false witness. But that word lying, the word lying in verse 16 is also used regarding a false witness in Deuteronomy 19. So anyway, the point is, I don't think it's as simple as saying that verse 16 is a careless lie and verse 19 is a deliberate lie. But whatever the words exactly mean, the fact that God mentions dishonesty and false speaking twice in a list of 7 things he hates tells us that any sort of inaccurate talk is disgusting to him. That's what he says. It disgusts me. In fact, that word abomination is used of some really terrible sins in the Bible that we won't even mention. Unthinkable things. It's actually used as well of the sacrifices that Israel used to make to the god of Molech. We can imagine, I mean, we'd be disgusted by that. God's certainly disgusted by that, and he's also disgusted by dishonesty. Here it's used of the sort of dishonesty and inaccuracy that we routinely do, and we sometimes come to accept in our life. And of course, it doesn't necessarily have to be something which is spoken. If God hates what is false, then if I say something, say a lie, that lie started in my head. That inaccuracy, that laziness in thinking started in my head. So God hates that as well. That's what he's telling us. So if I look, say if I might think, oh, Brother Evan, I don't see Brother Evan talking to Brother Mark very often. I wonder why that's the case. And I might think, yeah, well, Mark's a very talented guy, Evan not so much. I reckon he might be a little bit envious of him. I think maybe he feels a bit inadequate. Maybe Mark's sort of lording it over him a bit. And this has affected their relationship. I think that's what's going on there. And the whole thing is, I think this and maybe this and Mark might be doing this. And the whole thing is completely false. And God hates that sort of thing, because the next thing that's going to happen is I'm going to go up to someone else and I'm going to say that to them. I'm going to speak that lie in my head to someone else. And verse 19 says, God hates a false witness that speaketh lies. And that word in the Hebrew means to kindle a fire and to blow on it. The ESV renders it, you might have that in front of you, a false witness that breathes out lies. In other words, I've created this scenario in my head about Evan and Mark, and it's in my own head, and then I've gone and put it into someone else's head. And because they've listened to me so willingly, they're probably going to pass that on as well. And I've blown on that fire, and I've made this spread and multiplied the whole thing, and that whole thing, God says, I hate that. I absolutely hate seeing my children do that. Now, let's just turn over to Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 1. Look what it says here. In Proverbs 11 and verse 1, it says, a false balance is abomination to Yahweh, but a just weight is his delight. Now, that word abomination is the same word as in chapter 6, verse 16. It's disgusting. And the word false means craft or deception or guile. So it seems like it's talking about something quite deliberate. But the thing about this, great thing about this verse is it tells us that, yes, God is disgusted with that, but the opposite is something which delights him. A just weight is his delight. So if I was fiddling those weights for my benefit dishonestly, that disgusts God. But what delights him is just me being fair. So God's not saying, not only don't rip someone off, but, give them more. I mean, it's great if we do that. He's not saying, manipulate the weights to your customer's advantage. He's just simply saying, you do it, you be just and you be fair and honest and right. And he is absolutely delighted in that. If I was being even more generous, of course, that would be even better. But it's not asking for that in this verse. He's just saying, what delights me is just being fair and doing what is right and doing what is fair. Tell the truth. God's not asking us to adjust those scales in favor of someone else. He's just simply saying, be honest. And he finds that absolutely delightful. And it's interesting in this chapter because that verse, of course, it's talking about the concepts of honesty and dishonesty. He hates dishonesty and he loves honesty. But when we go to the page, if it's over your page in your Bible, verse 20, it says there, they that are of a froward heart are abomination to Yahweh, but such as are upright in their way are his delight. Now, this is talking again about dishonesty. The word froward means distorted or crooked or false. And the same terms as in verse 1 are used, abomination and delight. They're the same Hebrew words. But whereas in verse 1, it applied those words to the concepts of honesty and dishonesty, in verse 20, it applies them to people who are honest or dishonest. It's a bit like in, we've got it in front of us, Proverbs 12, verse 22. Lying lips are abomination to Yahweh, but they that deal truly are his delight. Same words again, abomination and delight. So people who speak what God considers disgusting, disgust him. That's what it's telling us. And people who speak what God considers delightful, delight him. That's worth thinking about, isn't it? When we stick rigidly to the truth in what we think and say of people or about anything at all, we are causing God to be happy. We are actually causing God to feel joyful. It's a pretty simple thing to do, isn't it? That's not a big ask for such an amazing result. We can give the God of this universe a delightful experience if we are just, if we just be honest. It's amazing to think that, isn't it? Just turn with me to Proverbs 25 and verse 18. Proverbs 25 and verse 18. And we read there, a man that beareth false witness against his neighbour is a maul and a sword and a sharp arrow. False witness, same words again as we found in Proverbs 6 and verse 19. A maul, by the way, is a heavy mallet or club. So if we look at those three instruments, they are brutal instruments. You know, if we were to imagine the sort of injury and damage they could inflict, imagine coming across someone in the street and they'd just been attacked by three people, each one wielding one of those, and they really laid into this person. What a mess that person would be. They're unlikely to ever fully recover. Now, we'd look at that, and there's a picture in that verse, and one of the problems is what we usually do, I think, often do, is say, oh, yeah, that's very graphic. You know, that's God's trying to give a graphic way for us to sort of imagine, in a way, the sort of damage that we can do. And we sort of downplay it a little bit. It's like when we were talking in Sunday school the other morning about where it says death and life are in the power of the tongue. We say, well, it's not literally death and life. And I suppose in a sense it's not. And yeah, we don't cut someone up with our mouth. But I think what it's not wanting us to downplay it. It is saying, be aware of the massive, often irrecoverable damage you could do by telling lies. You really could destroy someone's life. You really could, in the end, kill them. If you drove them, you know, in the wrong direction, or drove them out of the ecclesia, or whatever you did, you might not have, obviously, well, presumably we didn't mean to do it, but that is what can happen. So I think we don't want to downplay these proverbs and just say, yeah, that's graphic, but it's not really saying that. That's what God says. That's what He says we can do with with dishonesty. And of course, the proverb doesn't say the liar wields those weapons. It says the liar is those weapons. The liar is directly responsible for the catastrophic damage that came from that person's dishonesty. The person can't say, well, look, you know, it wasn't what I said. It was how they took what I said. That would be like me belting someone over the head with that maul and saying, I didn't cave their head in. It was the way their head responded to the maul hitting them in the skull. Right? I'm sort of one step removed. The proverb says, no, you might as well be the maul because you've actually done it. Your words have caused the damage. I am directly responsible for those results. Now, of course, as we have tried to do, we want to put God into these proverbs. And as we saw before in Deuteronomy 32, verse 4, we read, God is a God of truth. That's what He is. So there's no point being passionate about doctrinal truth, which we definitely should be, because God is too, if we're not equally passionate about truth in daily speech, because God is passionate about that too. Sometimes our inaccurate speech can be a little bit careless or a little bit lazy, but sometimes it can be a little bit more deliberate than what we care to admit, even if it's just slightly different. This proverb doesn't say big lies can cause damage. It says lies can cause damage. So it's not up to us to decide the threshold when it starts to become, you know, a really big serious issue. God says dishonesty is something which can do that. Which leads us to the subject. I just wanted to talk about inaccurate speech. Because we can read these 28 proverbs about honesty and we say, well, I'm an honest person. Like I could read it and think the opposite of truth is deliberate, blatant lying. Well, I don't really do that. And probably none of us do that. But if we just think that, then we're just going to read all those verses and say, well, that's good. I definitely do that one because I'm not a blatant liar. And we move on. And we miss the point. Very few people are deliberate, blatant liars. And hopefully none of us are. But if that's all we think, if that's all we think of when we read a proverb about honesty, like I say, we're going to say, that's one I do. I'm honest, and we'll happily move on. But the question is, how honest are we actually? I came across this little quote. Well, is this man here? Does anyone know who that is? I'd be absolutely shocked if anyone knows who that is. Really miserable looking character. But he's a man called Samuel Johnson. And he was an English writer. And he wrote religious writings. He died in 1784. So anyhow, I'd never heard of him before, but somehow I came across this thing. And this man called Boswell wrote a book about this man, Johnson, and it was called The Life of Johnson. Great title. And this is a little quote from the book. So this is what Boswell wrote about this man in this little scene. He said, next morning at breakfast, Johnson here, earnestly recommended a strict attention to truth, even in the smallest particulars. Teach your children, said he, constantly this. If a thing happened at one window, and they, when relating it, say it happened at another, do not let it pass, but instantly correct them. You do not know where deviation from truth will end. Our lively hostess replied, no, this is too much. Little variations in narrative must happen 1,000 times a day if one is not perpetually watching. Johnson replied, well, madam, you ought to be perpetually watching. And he said this, it is more from carelessness about truth than from intentional lying that there is so much falsehood in the world. It's very easy to underestimate the importance of accuracy, and especially when sometimes those little variations are not as careless or as unintentional as we sometimes like to think that they are. In fact, there was another quote that he said later in life, apparently. So he's changed his hairstyle a little. Although I must say, I did think that, this man's a stickler for honesty, but he's clearly losing his hair there, and he looks to be in his mid-30s or something. And later on in life, he's being a little bit dishonest about his hair loss, I think, because that's definitely not his hair. But anyway, we will. What did you say? What did someone say? He's got a wig on, yeah, I know. But what's he hiding though? We know what he's hiding, Sister Sharon. Exactly, and he needs to get rid of the wig. There's nothing wrong with baldness, is there? But he said this. He said, great caution is necessary to avoid adjusting stories. All truth is not indeed of equal importance, but if little violations are allowed, every violation will in time be thought little. And that's a good little warning, isn't it? So you might walk along and you hear a conversation like this. When you're walking along and you just hear a little bit of conversation as it passes you. It's always interesting to think, what was that all about? So you might hear this. I think she was sad about it, and I'm pretty sure he knew how she felt, but apparently he still said it. She was probably quite upset. And you hear that and you think, what's all that about? I wonder how true that actually is. Because the problem with that, of course, is these words here. She thinks, she's pretty sure, apparently, and she was probably quite upset. So someone says all of that with all of those words that make it get very, very murky towards the end, how much of it is actually truth. And the other person says, yes, it was very thoughtless of him. He should be more careful about the feelings of others. And meanwhile, this poor guy is somewhere else across town, working away in an office somewhere. He doesn't realise his reputation is being torn to shreds by these two people on the basis of a totally false conclusion. And the false conclusion was because of all these little doubtful things. They're being careless with the truth. And I guess the way that conversation should have gone would be something like that. I don't know how she felt, and I don't know if he knew either. I don't know if he said anything, so I don't know if she was upset or not. Now, of course, the problem with that is that's a boring conversation. That's going nowhere, right? The other person would say, I don't know if I want to speak to you anymore. In fact, I do know. It's one thing we do know. So that's the problem, isn't it? It's much more interesting if we just allow ourselves to just create this little scenario that might be true, might or it might not be, and we just take it and away we go. I remember some years ago, well, it was during COVID, And I was, it was one of the little brief moments in time in Melbourne where we had a window of time between lockdowns for a couple of days and then we all go home again. And I was sitting in a restaurant with Brother Cliff Simmons, actually, many of you would know him, at Knox City. Many of you would know that. And I remember it was packed because everyone's out and about for the first time. And we were sitting there and it was so much conversation going on. I said to Cliff, what percentage of all of these words do you reckon is absolutely true? All of these conversations going on. And we both came up with a figure in our head before we said that number. So just get a figure in your mind. What do you think? This is the percentage that would be absolutely true. Who would like to nominate what they've got in their head? Glenn, Brother Glenn, what are you thinking? 25% is true. Very dark view, but could be true. Any other nominations? What did you what did you think of? 5%. 5%. Gee, nasty. 5%. Oh, well, the figure I came up with was, well, I thought about 60, which now I think is very optimistic. Extremely so. Yeah. And I'm thinking Burnside might have a problem. So that's just a sample of 2. So let's say it's 60, like, and if it's 5% is true, we are just swimming in lies, aren't we? We're just all reacting to what is not even true. And it's amazing to think of that. I remember years ago, my brother Jack and I, we go to these toy fairs in Germany, and there's a guy there who we see every year called Jerry Crown. And you might have seen a board game with the name Crown Andrews on it. So he's Jerry Crown. And he goes to the toy fair every year with this lady called Audrey. She's his business partner. And we see them every year. And we always just say hello. That's about it. And anyway, one time we go there and we saw Audrey, but not Jerry. And we were with someone else and we said, oh, that's unusual to see Audrey without Jerry. And the person we were with said, he passed away. And we hadn't heard this news. And, oh, it's terrible. He was such a nice guy. And how did that happen without us hearing that? And then suddenly Jerry walks in the door. And there we are. So we went up to Jerry and gave him a big hug and said, you're looking well. Good. But you think to yourself, how did that happen? Like, maybe he was unwell and someone said Jerry's unwell, and then they told someone else Jerry's unwell. But at some stage, someone's heard Jerry's unwell and they've turned to the next person and said Jerry's dead, which is a big jump, but it must have happened for that to happen. So, this sort of thing can happen, and little changes can suddenly become a very major change in that case for poor Jerry. Now, just a final point on truth. Just come with me to Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 11. We read about weights before, just weights. Well, why is a just weight such a delight to God? This is why. Proverbs 16 and verse 11 says, a just weight and balance are Yahweh's. All the weights of the bag are his work. So these are God's weights and balances. Now, what does it actually mean? Well, those weights, what they do is they verify what is true. They are the truth of the matter. They will tell you the truth. That's what they do, unerringly, unfailingly. And that truth, those weights, belong to God. So the very truth that those weights produce, that's what they are truth producers, they are God's. The very concept of truth is part of who and what God is. He doesn't just like truth. He doesn't just speak truth. He actually is truth. And when we think and say a true thing, we are, in effect, endorsing what God is. It's like a little bit of God on the earth, in our lives, coming out of our mouth. That's really what it is. And the opposite of that, when we speak a lie, therefore, an untruth, is a denial of God himself coming out of our mouths. So that's how important accuracy is when we speak. And it's not up to us to decide, if it's big or small or if it doesn't really matter. Truth is God's. It is God. And when we speak the truth, we are endorsing the existence of God and exactly who he is. And that's why it's such an offense to God when we take the concept of truth that comes from him and we change it. Whether we do it deliberately or carelessly or flippantly, God hates that because it reflects on him in this world. Titus 1 verse 2 says God cannot lie. He cannot lie. So it's not our prerogative to decide what's harmlessly inaccurate. That is an affront to the God of truth. And that's what we mean by putting God into these proverbs, isn't it? An atheist might pick up the book of Proverbs, or an atheist, for example, might be an honest person. They might be honest, and that's great if they are, but they're not doing it to endorse and reflect God. They're just doing it, and that's good that they do. We want to be truthful people because God's a God of truth, and anything less than that is a denial of his very existence. Or if he does exist, if we're inaccurate with our speech, it's effectively saying, in this little instance, he doesn't matter. That's what we're really saying. We wouldn't think like that, but that's really the way he sees it. It's no accident, surely, that the first sin was prompted by a lie. And even though it was mixed with a bit of truth, it was still a lie. And the sin that came from that lie was absolutely disastrous on this world. No wonder God hates it. And it became, the word devil, we know, means a liar. That it became synonymous with sin. The effect of a single lie was disastrous. And when you think about what we can do in ecclesial life, we can do a lot of things, and we should do a lot of different things, a lot of work in our lives. We can stand for all sorts of things, and it's all pleasing to God. But if we're not truthful, you wonder what God thinks of it all. Maybe a firm decision to be zealously, obsessively accurate in everything we think and say may well be the greatest thing we could ever do in the service of our Heavenly Father. We would be practicing the very essence of who he is. We often talk about righteousness, don't we? We use the word righteousness, a word that we'll never use. We use it a lot. And if we were to summarize the whole Bible, and certainly the atonement, which is the central idea of the Bible, in a single sentence, we could do no better than to say that what it's all about is declaring God's righteousness. That's what the Bible does, and that's what the kingdom will do in this world. It will declare God's righteousness. And so surely one of the best ways for us to declare that in our life now is to live by the very simple words of Proverbs 12 and verse 17, he that speaketh truth showeth forth righteousness.
Well, thanks very much, Brother Andrew. That's brought us to a real pinnacle and a great moment for us to consider as we head into the weeks ahead. So thank you for your work tonight. Now let me just shut this laptop. Hopefully that'll stop screen sharing. Oh, look at that technology. Now there's a few announcements which we'll just quickly run through, but before we do, Osti is going to close our meeting with prayer in a minute. So if there's any welfare matters you'd like included in our welfare prayer, which was one of the original things we had at Burnside Bible classes, either send Osti a message directly or throw it up on the ecclesial chat, whichever you prefer. In no particular order, because I've sort of scribbled these all over the page, there's copies of the Burnside Buzz at the back. So if you missed out on the weekend, make sure you grab one of those, and particularly Brother Tim's amazing poem is in Burnside Buzz, so please do grab that. A thank you too to John and Heather. They've had to put up with Andrew for a week, so it was okay us saying come to Adelaide for a week, but they actually had to put up with him for a week. But seriously, thank you for on our behalf, extending hospitality to Andrew and looking after him so well. Even though he's done lots of walking, I think there's an extra pound or two. I'm just being truthful, Andrew. An extra pound or two that has developed since you arrived at John and Heather's. But thank you very much to John and Heather for doing that on our behalf. Very much appreciated. Now, speaking of an extra pound or two, I'm not quite sure how to address this because I don't want to go too far, but if we can remember back to a week ago when we all rolled into the hall, there was a significant thing going on, and there was groaning is the only way that could be described. It was quite loud groaning. I didn't want to use the word disappointed, so maybe it was concerned or disheartened. But as I walked into the hall tonight and had a little look at the supper down the back there, I think the brothers really outdid the sisters during this 10-year anniversary. I can get away with saying that because Deb's not here tonight. But for the rest of you husbands, I'm just being honest and expressing the honest truth. So we won't say disappointed, maybe disheartened, maybe concerned, worried. But yes, we'll look forward to that supper later. And perhaps, brothers, when you get home, those that cooked could give a little cooking lesson. Those that organised could perhaps. Anyway, enough of that. Announcements. Next Wednesday, God willing, is also part of our 10-year anniversary event, and it's what's been called our Ethos Night. Some of the best moments in those very earliest days of Burnside were our planning sessions when we took 30 people from 6 ecclesias and all different thoughts and views as to what would make a good new ecclesia. And we came together in some fantastic afternoons and evenings, and they really were amazing events. They were some of our best moments in those early years as we learnt to work closer together and build a new ecclesia. We're larger now. We've got new challenges. We've also got new opportunities and new things to think about. So next Wednesday night, we really want everyone to come together. Brother Steve is running the night. He told me to encourage you all to be there, but more importantly, encourage you all to think about what does Burnside mean today, and what do we need to think about as a group of brothers and sisters and families as we head towards the kingdom. So if everyone can give that some serious thought in the next week, and then come along next Wednesday night here for some open discussion and some sharing and some thoughts. And let's think about how we can together make our next 10 years as good as our first 10 years if our Lord doesn't return. So something to be involved in, something to make sure that we get actively involved in and really think through so we can come along prepared and ready to go. And Andrew, could we get you to just come back out just for a minute, please? And as Andrew does that, I just want all of you to think about the week we've had and the talks we've had. The thing that stands out for me in that week is the Bible's concept of friendship. And you may remember Andrew said the word for friendship is a related word to the word for shepherd, and therefore friendship is tending a flock. And that really, for some reason, hit me quite strongly as an amazing concept and something that really I could learn from and take away from this week. So hopefully you've all got something similar. And while you're thinking about that, just a couple of little gifts, Andrew, to say thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very kind. That's lovely. I'm on the edge, so I'll be able to crop everyone out, and I'll blow that shot up. It's a particularly nice shot of you. It's good. Thank you very much, everyone, once again for your very warm welcome. It's been lovely to be with you, and God bless you as you head off into your next 10 years, God willing. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. I was actually pleased that he picked on Mark and Evan tonight. It was your turn. Otherwise, I might not have been able to thank him if he had another go at me. There's only so much you can take. But it's interesting to reflect on Andrew, and I've known Andrew pretty much as long as I can remember. back in the day, we didn't have cereal as kids, and they used to come and stay with us, and they were allowed to have cereal because they were guests. And Andrew's mum, actually, we were reminiscing on the walk the other day. Andrew's mum would slip us a wheat bix because, you know, the poor dears need to eat something. So I have very fond memories of Andrew and his family. But probably the ultimate compliment I can give to Andrew is this, that Brother Josh, our finance brother, said the flights were pretty reasonably priced. And Andrew will take that as an enormous badge of honour that was noted by Josh. So thank you, Josh, for paying him, but thank you, Andrew, for a great week together. So, brothers and sisters, we're going to conclude now with Armour of Light, and then we'll ask Osti to come up and close with prayer.
Daily over, and how we spend our time. When you have reassured us, you want us on your side. Yes, the days are evil, and through the flesh is weak. But God is our refuge, and His name will we seek. Put on the armor of light. Into the darkest night, led by your Son, your word is right, our faith is sight. Only your joy and our lives, nothing compares to this life. Your sons and daughters holding fast, redeemed by you, steadfast and strong. Help us confirm our calling to embody your Son, to speak and not be silent, so sin will outrun. Despite His no decision, we want eternity with you. So live for this mission, the ambassadors of truth. Put on the armor of light, into the darkest night. Led by your Son, your word is right, our faith is sight. Only your joy and your lives, nothing compares to this life. Your sons and daughters holding fast, redeemed by you, steadfast and strong. Turn towards distraction, bound in your word, we're bound in your word. To strive after the wind, we're delight in your Lord, delight in your Lord. Riches of this world, counted as lost, counted as lost. Treasures of this world, counted as lost, counted as lost. Driven by grace, driven by grace. Driven by grace, driven by grace, driven by grace, driven by grace, driven by grace. Put on the armor of light, into the darkest night. Led by your Son, your word is right, our faith is sight. Only your joy and your minds, nothing compares to this life. Your sons and daughters holding fast, redeemed by you, redeemed by you. Put on the armor of light, into the darkest night. Led by your Son, your word is right, our faith is sight. Only your joy and our minds, nothing compares to this life. Your sons and daughters holding fast, redeemed by you, steadfast and strong. Counted as lost, steadfast and strong. Counted as lost, steadfast steadfast and strong. Count it as lost, steadfast and strong.
Father, now at the end of our 10th anniversary celebrations, we come to thank you for this community you have blessed us with. Help us to take nothing for granted, but grow in us gratitude and humility as we have been blessed with much that others don't have. A community we feel safe and comfortable in is such a rare blessing, so help us to look out for those who may not fit in or feel as included, that we can show true appreciation that is lived, not just said. Please, if it is your will, heal those who are sick or injured. We think of Tex and the McCallum family, Auntie Mia Luke, and little Sylvia and her family, especially now. Again, we know how blessed we are, so help shift our focus outwards on what we can do for those who are less fortunate or struggling with mental and physical sickness, just as your son did. And as always, please help our faith grow individually. Help us to be willing and teachable so you can shape our lives. Thank you for your amazing love, your mercies which are new every morning. May this transform us, God, so we look beyond our own desires and embrace the difficult steps to lay aside our ego and rather live elevated lives like Jesus. It's through his name all is possible. Amen.